Joining us now is Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, how are you this morning?
I'm great. Good to be with you. How are you guys?
Good, Mitch. We're hanging in there. I got a chance to catch you with Schmitty yesterday on the drive back. I had 590 on, man. I feel like you're a lot of places. Do you feel busy now being in hot demand and having the podcast now? I
It's not
mean,
a
you
lot
do have a
different. No.
regular job.
Yeah, it's not a lot different. The podcast is great. Just got done doing that here this morning, but it's like a 45-minute commitment a day. So if I'm not doing that, I'm probably just scrolling the socials. So this is more productive for sure.
What were the hot
But
topics on the pod? What shouldn't we ask you about if you feel talked out?
we were talking about Thomas Fidone and Ramir Johnson, and in the new episode of Chasing Three that came out last night. I thought it was. You can ask me about it. I thought it was super cool that I don't know if you guys saw it, but
Yeah.
they took people behind the scenes and let them hear what it sounds like to the quarterback when a play gets called in the discussion that the coaches have
Mhm.
up until there's 15 seconds on the play clock. So I was kind of marveling at that technology and just what it looks like. Um, and then we had a debate about an actual debate. Connor and I haven't debated a bunch, but he thinks that Nebraska needs to be the kind of offense that features a 1,000-yard running back, and I do not.
Let me ask you something about the play calling and
Mhm.
hearing that, because this is something that we don't really talk about a lot because I don't think we like to criticize. And I also think that there have been times Coach Rule has addressed it directly in his press conferences with young quarterbacks and inexperienced quarterbacks. And he listened to those play calls and then the stress of a team that hasn't won a lot of one score games, timeout, situational management. That's clearly a part that's got to get better for Nebraska, right? Coach Rule said, listen, we got to get better in game too. It's not just about having better players. The staff's got to get better too. Did you find yourself, was it more, less complicated? Did you empathize, sympathize with the play call, what has to happen, the weird situations that Nebraska found themselves in, or were you like, you know what, this is just coaching, right? We do have to get better with some of the in-game stuff on the fly.
Well, I think they have to be careful about exactly how it's used because it could become something. And I'm talking about like the coach to player communication with the new in helmet system. It could be something that weighs a little bit heavily on a young quarterback.
Mm.
And if you and it's good that if Nebraska is turning to Dylan Raiola here, it's good that he's starting his career with this as opposed to like playing 1 year with the old system and then you bring it in year two. So that's nice. But I still will still say you don't want it to be talking to him. You can talk too much in that moment. I think they need to be clear and concise and of course not saying everything that they're thinking, the coaches. I mean there's a massive amount of information they could be trying to give him about what they see on the defense as it lines up and just last minute um, advice and instruction, but it needs to be minimized. And I'm sure all coaches are going to go through a process and have started to already because they've been using it in the spring of determining what is the right thing to talk to the quarterback about in that moment and what probably just needs to be held until he's on the sideline or it's the week after the game.
Mitch, how helpful do you think it is to have somebody like Glenn Thomas with an NFL background who kind of understands that a little bit more, or at least understands that process of when you're communicating with the quarterback and how much to communicate in real time versus coming back later?
Yeah, he's been doing it with the Steelers and the Falcons, earlier in his career. So it's not going to be new to him. And of course, Matt Rule, it's not a new thing to him either. So that's all beneficial. And I think that, what I mentioned a minute ago about finding the happy medium of talking to them enough, but not too much, is going to be easier for Thomas and Rule and Satterfield to master because they've been in this spot before. Maybe for a coach who hasn't, you get through the spring and you do it a certain way. And then when the stakes are raised in September, all of a sudden they want to say a lot more, and they find themselves, even though they were prepared, having a difficult time, keeping it to the stuff that's going to benefit the player in that moment.
Mitch, we were talking to Brian Christopherson a couple of weeks ago, and he was doing this, the most indispensable 24 in 2024. And one of the guys that I felt like was kind of going to be underappreciated or kind of considered an afterthought was Thomas Fidone. When you look at kind of what he could mean, the intermediate passing game, a quarterback's best friend, he's experienced. Not to ask a leading question, but where would Fidone be in that conversation for you? Do we think enough about him? Are we dismissive? Is he underappreciated? Or are you like, hey, you know what? Like, this guy's going to be critical?
I put him near the top. I don't think in my view, he's not underappreciated because I appreciate what he brings. I think he's a huge part of what Nebraska needs in 2024, not just from the production side of it, but now that he's been in the program for as long as he has, and he's been through the injuries, which make him infinitely more experienced and wise to the ways of how things work in college football. He's a huge part of the locker room and the mentality that Nebraska wants offensively. There's all kinds of stories about Fidone that Matt Rule has told and that I've heard through the years. The one that's sticking in my head right now, because I heard Rule say this in the spring, is about a conversation that he had with Thomas after the 23 season. And I think it was something along the lines of, hey, you caught, it was around 30 passes last year. That's really good. And Thomas, his response was like, no, it's not. It's not. Like, it's not who he wants to be. I mean, he has extremely high standards, and they haven't changed because he's had 2 ACL tears. That's only emboldened him to be even better. So all of that put together with where they're at in this offense and what he can bring for the quarterbacks, it makes indispensable is like the perfect word for him. And of all the skill guys on the offensive side, I might rate him number 1 among indispensable players. Aside from the quarterback.
Remember looking at those lists? I didn't see. So he had asked some of the folks like on the board, obviously, and then he was going to do his, but there wasn't one list out of the first 13 or 14 that I scrolled through that had him above 8.
Oh, again, once you get past the quarterback,
I thought it was weird.
I think I saw him at like 3 or 4 on one, but most of them, you're right, they were.
I was like, gosh, I think we take him for granted.
Yeah, we've been watching him play for a long time.
Like we want more, but I do think he's got a chance to be pretty good.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see what good looks like at that position, because there's other options, and there's other, Thomas isn't going to play 60 snaps. I don't think, unless they're in double tight, all the time, which they won't be with their wide receivers. So, he's going to be like 40, 45, and, Borkature is going to play a lot. And then some of that depends also on just how many snaps there are available altogether on offense. What kind of an offense is
you got to get out of the low 60s, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
That thing's got to be closer to 70.
It's harder now in college football with the way the clock moves and started last year to get up in the, it used to, I don't think it used to be that difficult to have 75 plays, 70 to 75. And now it's tougher. And it makes things different for a guy like Fidone, who isn't at a position where you play every play. I mean, if you're the center or the quarterback, you're going to play every play, but tight ends and the way that they want to use them, it's a different challenge. And, they're going to want to get Carter Nelson into the game. Maybe not at traditional tight end, but some reps there. They're going to, obviously Nate Borkature is going to play a lot.
Yeah, good player.
So yeah, it's still though indispensable, even if he's only playing 40, 45 snaps, indispensable like that. That's Fidone for me.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Mitch, Let me ask you this about the tight end room, because as you've, I'm sure, noticed, Nebraska has both signed and is recruiting a million different tight ends.
Yeah.
Apparently, most of them from the state of Nebraska for some reason, because I guess Nebraska just has a plethora of 6 foot tall, 220 athletic guys running around in high school right now. Do
That's what
you
it looks
think
like.
it really does? Do you think it's important for, like, I guess, proof of concept or case studies to have Thomas Fidone be successful in terms of getting some of those numbers up? Or do you think they just recruit all these guys because they're like, hey, they fit an athletic profile, we'll find a spot for them, we don't care if it's actually tight end or not?
Well, yeah, it's different. It's like two different positions or three different positions. So, like Eric Ingerson plays a different position than Carter Nelson, and they're in the same recruiting class and they're listed at the same position, but they're not going to use them in any way as the same kind of player. I mean, Lindenmeyer, like, he doesn't play the same position as Thomas Fidone. They can do some of the same.
Another guy that's going to play a lot.
Yeah, right. He's going to play a lot too, and he's going to do different things than what Fidone does, even though they'll have some crossover in that also. It's important for Thomas Fidone to have a good season. It's important for Nebraska for Thomas Fidone to have a good season and have some numbers and be a big part of this team. I don't think it's important for like the overall movement of the program and where Nebraska's at and its ability to continue to recruit these athletes, these great athletes in the state of Nebraska who play tight end, for Thomas to have like X number of catches. Like, it's going to be a productive position for Nebraska. That needs to happen, but it doesn't all have to be Thomas. Like, if another guy like Ismail Smith Flores, like if he kind of emerges and turns into like a red zone guy and catches 5 touchdowns, like, that's fine. Like, if Carter Nelson is a Swiss Army knife and does various things for Nebraska, that's great. It doesn't need to be one guy, and I think it's probably beneficial if it's spread around.
The other funny thing is, I'm going through this, is a guy like Janarian Bonner. I mean, you could break the huddle like an 11 personnel with one back, one tight end, and if he wants to play, motion him to like an inline tight end and get to 12, like, you can. Like, he's another versatile guy that can play along that deal. When you look at like indispensable, how many of the guys in the secondary make your top 5, if any?
Top 5 on the whole team or just the defense?
On the whole team. Indispensable.
Tommy Hill is there. Just because of your number one corner is somebody you need. I mean, you can have a whole team, but if you don't have that guy, then you're very vulnerable. And then I'd have to put it together, but Isaac Gifford would be close. And he might be there. In fact, I think you can make a case that he's there for sure. Like, maybe even the number one guy, or right around the number one guy on the whole defense. But that's open for debate. So those two are in contention, and I would probably just automatically stick Tommy Hill there because of the position that he plays. Isaac gets it more so because of the person that he is and the impact he can have on the team.
Where would you put Ty and Nash in that conversation?
I mean, there's not enough spots to go around to include all of these guys. I mean,
well, you get 24. They don't have to be in your top 5.
Oh, okay. In the 20, they're not. I was going to say, you can't put all these guys in your top 5.
Yeah, just in general in this conversation in terms of importance on the defense.
Yeah.
Like, where do they slot in?
Very high on the defense. They're both in the top 5 on the defense, and you probably got to have one of them. And I'm not sure which one it's going to be. Like, right now, we talk about Ty and Nash, like Nash and Ty and Nash. It's interchangeable. They don't do the same things. Again, like at the tight end spot, there's some crossover in some of the stuff that they do. But I'm excited to see when the season begins, like how those guys differentiate from each other in the kind of play that Nebraska gets, and what their snap counts look like, and what Nash looks like as a player at a different weight than what he played at last year, and Ty Robinson, also is, I think, going to be somewhat of a different player in 24 than he was in 23. So I can't necessarily like rank them in order with each other at this point, because I don't know. But just the two of them as a duo are, they're essential for Nebraska to have success. I think that whole the 3-3-5 and the way Nebraska runs it, 4-2-5 sometimes, various looks out of the 3-3-5 with Tony, but that position in the middle, the big guy, if they're talented and you have depth and they're experienced and they can get a stop, on a 3rd and 1, then just because of that, they're indispensable.
And maybe they're in this order, maybe they're not. But of like the Charles Boodle Nation kind of trio over there, who do you need at least 2, right? You need 2 of those 3 to be almost interchangeable, or do you need all 3, do you think?
Well, it depends on Blyhill and, how that goes through the summer. If it's September before he can even go full speed, then yeah, you're going to need, and Dwight Boodle is coming back from injury himself, but you're going to need for sure 2 of those guys and probably 3 players overall at that position.
Boodle, Buford, I'm sorry, Little Buford.
Right. Yeah, Mario, as a true freshman, and Dwight Boodle too. I mean, all of those guys. Jeremiah Charles, we know about his athleticism, and I think it's going to come together at some time. And it'll be interesting to see if he's just not experienced enough where you can count on him right now to say, all right, athletically he's got it, but can he just step in right away? Like, okay, Blyhill goes down. Who's next up? All right, Jeremiah, get out there. Like, yeah, he's going to handle it athletically, but is he going to know what to do all the time? And could he be a liability because of his inexperience? And then the others that we're talking about here, with Buford, and Boodle are also inexperienced. So maybe if that's the case, you have to take something away from that safety group and put Malcolm Hartzog back at that spot. But
I almost put Hartzog in I almost put him in my top 5, but he certainly makes my Fidone discussion where it's like, I think we know too much about him, and
he's underappreciated.
We boxed him in, but we need him to be really, really good. He's bigger, he's stronger. I think he's faster. He looks fantastic. Like, he's pretty underappreciated because he's a borderline football savant.
Yeah, and there were times last year where I think he got just kind of, maybe he gets overlooked in the conversation right now because there were times last year where he looked like he made a mistake here or there, or was overmatched on one particular play in a game. But I don't think that's who he is. And you saw that football intelligence from the year before, his true freshman year, just what he can add when he has when he knows what he's doing. Like last year, it was tough for him because he went back and forth between corner and safety. And this year, I think what they need, and I know Evan Cooper feels this way because I've heard him say it. What they need to do with Malcolm is find the position that is going to work for him, and hopefully you're able to keep him there all year. And that's going to be easier said than done because of the timeline with Blyhill, and then the maturing process, the football maturing process with Charles and Buford and the others who play corner.
Mitch,
Ethan Nation too.
We've talked about a lot of guys that would be in our top 5s or would be, kind of knocking on that door, that underappreciated. One guy we haven't talked about yet, and I'm going to try not to ask this in a leading way like I did with Brian Christopherson or whoever we were talking to last time. Where does Dylan Raiola fall there for you without having ever seen him play real college football?
I think just because of the nature of the position, it's well, I don't know. I was going to say it's number 1, and it probably is. But in this conversation about indispensable, I think you have to consider the whole position. And, go to Ohio State.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Go to Ohio State and talk about Will Howard, as indispensable, and he is. But it's a little bit less so because you've got of who you have behind him, and that there's a bunch of 5 stars just like lined up. So in assessing the indispensability of Dylan Raiola, you have to come to some kind of a conclusion about what Nebraska has with Heinrich Haarberg and Danny Kaelin right now. I believe the narrative about Haarberg that he made big strides this winter and spring, and that
is it because you saw it?
In part, yes, but it's more than that. It's hearing the way it was described, and then sure, seeing it in bits of practice, and then in the spring game, it certainly helped. And I also think you have to like take a 30,000-foot view of the 23 season, and our memory, like the lasting memory of him, is November when he was beat up and beat down a little bit. He won 5 games as a starting quarterback, and it wasn't all about the plays that he made. A lot of it had to do with the defense, but some of it was about the plays that he made and the way that he came through when they needed him to come through. It didn't work with anybody else. There wasn't another quarterback on the game who started a game that Nebraska won last season, so he gets credit for that. And I realized that some of those games were mishmashes of different quarterbacks playing, but he started them, so it's on his ledger. Yeah, it's a combination of things, but a lot of it does have to do with just like the way that I saw him throw the ball in the spring game. And I think he's a different player than he was last year. But I also think that when it all shakes out, there's going to be a gap between Dylan and everybody else, and that his tools and everything that he brings are on a different level. So even with a valuable player and somebody who you could rely on in Heinrich Haarberg, when you have a difference maker at quarterback, I think that just like by the nature of it makes that player the most indispensable on the whole roster.
That's Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Great stuff as always, Mitch. We appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Mitch.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Reminder before we get to our next break, get out to Warhorse Sportsbook either in Lincoln or at Horseman's Park in Omaha. We've got Belmont Stakes coming up this weekend. We'll talk to our guy Big A on Friday, see if he can handicap things a little bit for you. Once he does, though, make sure you get over to Warhorse and see if you can get a little winnings for yourself. Maybe have a nice little pocket money for a summer holiday you're going on. If you're able to get those big wins, hit warhorsecasino.com/sportsbook for a full list of details and house rules. That's Warhorse Sportsbook. No bets, no glory. More Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.